About the crowds. Well, at this time in the show, we always show you something that's trending on social media. How about this? You couldn't get
171,000 views versus just 9,000. Those weren't match highlights or championship celebrations. They were the view counts for 2 Australian Open 2026 pre-tournament press conferences. The larger audience tuned in to hear a 20-year-old Filipina who would eventually exit in the opening round. The smaller audience watched the reigning world number 1. That player was Alexandra Eala, and those numbers revealed something rankings alone could never explain. By the end of this video, you'll see why one of tennis' biggest stars arrived at Wimbledon focused on protecting her reputation, while Eala stepped onto the grass carrying the hopes of an entire nation. If you've been following her rise since the breakthrough in Miami, her junior Grand Slam success, or even before the tennis world fully recognized her potential, you're in the right place. Join our growing community of fans who have believed in this journey from the very beginning. Now set the rankings aside for a moment and look at the momentum. Just days before Wimbledon, Eala captured her first professional grass court title in Birmingham. Earlier, she stunned world number 2 Aryna during an outstanding run to the Berlin semifinals. Confidence, belief, and expectations had never been higher heading into the biggest grass court tournament of the season.
An absolutely stunning performance from Alexandra Eala.
On June 27th, just days before Wimbledon began, Alexandra Eala completed a lengthy practice session on the famous Aryna courts and made history as the first Filipino player ever to enter a Grand Slam as a seeded competitor. It was a milestone that reflected years of steady progress and rising expectations. Across the draw, the atmosphere was very different for world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka. Instead of discussing her tennis alone, much of the attention centered on her recent struggles. Following her disappointing French Open campaign, Sabalenka openly admitted she had gone through an emotionally difficult period as she worked to regain confidence before Wimbledon.
Just wanna quit tennis right now, but we'll see. We'll see in a few days. Hopefully I'll get back on track.
I felt like I just wanted to walk away from tennis. Those candid words from Aryna Sabalenka captured the emotional pressure she was carrying in the weeks leading up to Wimbledon. British media focused heavily on her mindset, with many describing her pre-tournament press conference as one of the toughest she had faced in recent memory. Instead of discussing tactics or title ambitions, much of the conversation revolved around handling criticism, expectations, and recovering mentally after a painful French Open defeat. At the same time, Alexandra Eala's Wimbledon story was unfolding in a completely different way. She wasn't being asked to explain setbacks or defend her public image. Instead, reporters were asking about the overwhelming support from Filipino fans and even what she might say if she lifted the Wimbledon trophy. That contrast revealed just how dramatically her profile had grown in only a few months. The attention surrounding Eala had already become impossible to ignore at the Australian Open earlier in the season. According to publicly available YouTube statistics, her official press conference attracted around 171,000 views, far exceeding the audiences for several of the sport's biggest stars. The number surprised many observers because Eala entered the tournament without the ranking or resume usually associated with that level of worldwide interest. Yet fans from around the globe, especially the Philippines, tuned in to hear every word she had to say. The excitement extended far beyond online views. During the Australian Open, demand to watch Eala in person exceeded expectations. Reports described long lines forming outside one of the tournament's smaller courts as spectators waited for the chance to watch her compete. Crowds filled the area well before play began, creating scenes rarely associated with an early round match featuring a young rising player. The unexpected demand even sparked conversations about court assignments. Tournament organizers later acknowledged that the level of interest had been greater than anticipated, a sign that Eala's popularity had reached a point where major events could no longer overlook her growing fan base. By the time Wimbledon arrived, that momentum had translated into history. Eala entered the championships as the first Filipino player ever to be seeded at a Grand Slam singles event. The achievement reflected years of consistent improvement and placed her among the tournament's top-ranked competitors for the first time. It wasn't simply another career milestone, it marked a breakthrough for Philippine tennis on one of the sport's biggest stages. Her confidence had been built through outstanding performances during the grasscourt season. At the Birmingham tournament, Eala battled through a demanding 3-set final to capture her first professional grasscourt title. It was the perfect preparation before Wimbledon and confirmed that her success was no longer limited to one surface. What happened after the victory resonated just as strongly as the match itself. During the trophy presentation, Eala paused to thank her supporters in Tagalog, expressing heartfelt gratitude to Filipinos who had followed her journey around the world. It was a brief but meaningful moment that connected deeply with fans who had celebrated every step of her rise. For many supporters, Hearing their language on an international championship stage represented something much bigger than a tennis victory. Her Birmingham triumph was no isolated success. Earlier in Berlin, Eala produced one of the most impressive runs of her career by defeating former Wimbledon champion Aryna before adding another high-quality victory over Aryna Svitolina. Although her tournament ended in the semi-finals, the performances demonstrated that she could consistently challenge and defeat elite opponents on grass. With every tournament, expectations continued to rise. Crowds were no longer watching out of curiosity alone. They believed they were witnessing the emergence of a genuine contender capable of competing with the very best players in the world. Meanwhile, Sabalenka entered Wimbledon carrying a different narrative. Discussions surrounding the world number one often centered on recovering emotionally after recent disappointments rather than building momentum toward another major title. The contrast between the two players became one of the tournament's most fascinating storylines, one arriving with growing confidence and the backing of an entire nation, the other working to rediscover her best form under the constant spotlight. Veteran tennis voices also noticed the shift. Experienced broadcasters and former players pointed to the extraordinary crowds following Eala, emphasizing that such scenes are rarely created by an emerging player. To them, it wasn't simply a temporary surge of popularity. It looked like the arrival of a new global star whose influence was expanding far beyond the tennis court. When respected voices within tennis begin noticing the same trend, it usually means something significant is happening. Former British number one and experienced broadcaster Kia Thaving didn't simply comment on Alex Eala's growing popularity, she highlighted how extraordinary the crowds had become during the Australian Open. Coming from someone who has spent years around Grand Slam events, her observations carried real weight. They suggested that tournaments were beginning to realize Eala's fan following had outgrown the expectations placed on a rising player. She wasn't the only prominent figure paying attention. Former world number 4 and US Open finalist Greg Ruzetsky also identified Eala as one of the players capable of making a deep Wimbledon run. He pointed not only to her improving grasscourt game but also to the remarkable support she receives from Filipino fans wherever she competes. When multiple respected analysts independently arrive at the same conclusion, it becomes more than excitement, it becomes recognition that a genuine shift may be taking place. The Wimbledon draw also created an intriguing opportunity. Aryna Sabalenka and Alex Eala were placed in opposite halves of the tournament, meaning they could only meet if both reached the championship match. Instead of facing the world number one in the early rounds, Eala had the chance to build momentum through her section of the draw. Her opening challenge came against Renata Zarazua, a match that carried plenty of importance on its own. A victory would move Eala one step closer to another headline-grabbing showdown and further strengthen the belief that she could produce another memorable Grand Slam run. Beyond the individual matches, however, Eala's rise reflects something much larger than tennis results. For decades, the sport's biggest commercial audiences have traditionally come from Europe, North America, and Australia. The emergence of a Filipino star competing for major titles introduces an entirely new audience into the global conversation. The Philippines is home to well over 100 million people, and millions more Filipinos live and work around the world. That worldwide community has embraced Eala's journey with remarkable enthusiasm, creating an atmosphere that tournament organizers have increasingly been forced to recognize. Every appearance attracts passionate supporters both inside stadiums and across digital platforms, making her one of the sport's fastest-growing attractions. As the season continues, that influence is only expected to expand. Wimbledon represents another major opportunity, followed by the North American hardcourt swing and eventually a return to Melbourne, where organizers are unlikely to underestimate fan demand again. The lessons learned earlier in the year have already demonstrated that Eala's popularity cannot be treated like that of a typical emerging player. What makes her story even more compelling is that it has never been a perfect, uninterrupted rise. Alongside breakthrough victories have come disappointing defeats. She exited the Australian Open in the first round despite making a brilliant start. Roland Garros ended earlier than she had hoped. Her Bad Homburg campaign also finished sooner than expected just before Wimbledon. Yet those setbacks reveal an important part of her character. After the Bad Homburg loss, Eala didn't search for excuses or blame circumstances. She acknowledged that the conditions were difficult, accepted the result, and focused on moving forward. That measured response reflected the maturity that has become one of her defining qualities. Only days later, she answered in the strongest way possible by winning the Birmingham title. Instead of dwelling on disappointment, she turned it into motivation and lifted the biggest grass-court trophy of her career. Looking back over the past few months, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Record-breaking online attention. Extraordinary crowds at major tournaments. Historic milestones for Philippine tennis. Victories over elite opponents. A first WTA grasscourt title. Each achievement has added another layer to a story that continues gaining momentum. Meanwhile, Aryna Sabalenka remains the player everyone is chasing in terms of rankings and results. She is still one of the most dominant competitors in women's tennis. But entering Wimbledon, the spotlight wasn't focused solely on her performances. Much of the conversation centered on pressure, expectations, and recovering from recent disappointment. Eala arrived carrying a very different energy. She wasn't defending a reputation or responding to criticism. She was representing millions of supporters who see her success as something far bigger than individual victories. That contrast makes this Wimbledon especially fascinating. One player enters as the established world number one, determined to reinforce her position at the top. The other enters as a rising contender whose popularity continues to grow with every tournament. Now the conversation shifts to the court. Can Alexandra Eala reach the second week at Wimbledon? Can she turn months of momentum into another Grand Slam breakthrough? And if she does, who becomes the tournament's biggest story, the reigning world number one pursuing another major title, or the young Filipina inspiring an entire nation? Share your prediction in the comments. If you've been following Alexandra Eala's journey since her earliest breakthrough moments, you're in the right place. Subscribe, join our growing community, and stay with us as we follow every match from Wimbledon through the US Open season.